Wondered what it looks like to make it in America. Have you ever wondered what it must be like to taste not only the good life, but the great life? What do you think it means to make it in America? So if I asked you that question, what are some of the responses that you might say? What are some things that you might say means to make it in America? Craig's thinking, I can see that. Some things we'd say, this means you've made it, you've arrived, you're successful. What are some things that we might say?
Home ownership.
Home ownership, great answer. What else?
Freedom.
Freedoms. Good thoughts.
To be secure enough we're not a burden to others or to society.
Great. Good. So you guys are hitting on some of the answers. If you were to survey 2,000 Americans, you would get a response that looks something like this. Now, this is a little hard to see, so I'm going to talk it over with you. But they asked 2,000 people to define what it means to make it in America. And the road to success, a snapshot of the average person, if they make it, looks something like this. So, to make it in America means you're married, that you have 2 kids, you have 4 friends, and a bachelor's degree. You make $147,000 a year, working 31 hours per week. You work primarily from home. You take 5 weeks off a year, travel 3 times a year. You own a home valued at $461,000, and you own a car valued at $41,000. This is the snapshot of what 2,000 Americans think it means to make it in America. And if you're like me, when you saw this picture of success and greatness, I was like, well, I'm never going to make it. You know, I don't think I'm ever going to own a home that's worth $461,000 or a car that's worth $41,000. I don't have 2 kids, so already I can't make it. So if you look at this picture of greatness and success, it can be really sad and depressing or frustrating because we're like, we're never going to make it. We're never going to become truly great. But the good news is that although this might be the picture of greatness in America, it's not Jesus' picture of greatness. And so today what I want to spend some time talking about is what's Jesus' picture of greatness? What does it mean to be truly great, not in the eyes of America or in the eyes of these 2,000 Americans? What does it look like to be truly great in the eyes of Jesus? And so this morning we're going to talk about that the secret to greatness is service. That service is the secret to true greatness. So we're going to talk about this based on a story out of Mark chapter 10. So if you have your Bibles with you, I invite you to pull those out or pull one off from the back of the pew in front of you and flip to Mark chapter 10. Matthew, you have the New Testament, you have Matthew, then Mark, and you're looking for chapter 10. As you're turning to Mark chapter 10, we're going to start reading there at verse 35 in a few minutes. But as you're flipping there, some context about this story. Jesus and his disciples are walking along the road to Jerusalem. And Jesus knows what awaits him in Jerusalem. Jesus knows that he's approaching the end of his life, and so he knows that he's going to face the cross in Jerusalem. And this weighs heavily on Jesus' shoulders. In fact, it even says that Jesus was walking out a little further ahead of some of his other disciples, and I think that's because the weight of what he knew was coming was on his shoulders. But Jesus wants to prepare his disciples for what is coming, and so, like any good leader, he wants to help them be best equipped for what's about to come. And so he pulls the 12 disciples together, and he tells them what's about to happen to him in Jerusalem. This isn't the first time Jesus has told them this, but he wants to tell them again what's about to happen. And so Jesus pulls the 12 together and says, okay guys, we're on this road to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the religious authorities, like the scribes and the chief priests, they're going to turn me over and I'm going to be sentenced to death. And they're going to hand me over to the Romans and they're going to mock me and spit on me and crucify me, and I'm going to be nailed on a Roman cross, and I'm going to die on that Roman cross. The good news is that 3 days later I'm going to rise for the dead, but first I have to endure the cross. And so Jesus tells this to his 12 disciples as they're journeying toward Jerusalem. We know that all 12 heard Jesus' words and told them what's about to happen But at least 2 of the 12 completely misunderstood what Jesus was talking about. And so to this conversation between those 2 disciples, and their names were James and John, we're going to turn this morning to look at their conversation with Jesus. So this is Mark chapter 10, beginning in verse 35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." I can almost hear the sneakiness in James and John's tone as they come up to Jesus. Like, "Jesus, we want you to agree to do something for us before we even tell you what it is," right? Kind of like kids who want their parents maybe to do something for them before they tell you what the task actually is. Maybe it's because they know that Jesus isn't going to like the task that they're going to ask of him. But they come up and ask Jesus, "Agree to do something for us." And Jesus wisely says to them, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" And James and John say to Jesus, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." When you see the request that James and John are asking for, you can realize that they completely misunderstood Jesus. Like, when I see this, I was like, guys, what part of like the whole sentence to death, the mocked, the beat upon, the spit upon, what part of that didn't you understand that Jesus just told you? So, like, what are you asking for? This isn't some victory march into Jerusalem. This is a death march that you're headed toward the cross. And so what part of Jesus' words didn't you understand? But maybe they just tried to make Jesus' words a metaphor. Maybe they thought, oh, Jesus doesn't actually mean that he's going to die. Maybe Jesus is just speaking in hyperbole, saying like, oh, it's going to be a rough road, but eventually we're going to come out on top. And so maybe James and John thought that once Jesus comes out on top, we want to make sure that we're in the right and the left-hand side of positions of power in Jesus' kingdom. So maybe this is what they thought as they're walking toward Jerusalem. But Jesus says to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" Jesus looks at James and John and thinks to himself, guys, this isn't what you think. It's not a victory march. In fact, the cup that I'm about to drink is the cup of suffering, and it's the cross. And do you really think that you can endure that? In fact, you have no idea what you're asking, because somehow through the cross, God's plan of redemption will be glorified. So to ask to sit on my right and left in my glory is to ask to be nailed on a cross on either my right or on my left. That's actually what you're asking. You just have no idea, because you don't understand what's about to happen. And so James and John, in this false sense of confidence, tell Jesus, yes, Jesus, we're able. Then Jesus says to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has been prepared." Jesus looks at James and John and he says, well, you guys are right to some extent, because someday you will drink a cup of suffering. You will be baptized in the sense of death and resurrection, because we actually know from Acts chapter 12, we know that James was martyred at the hands of King Herod. We also know that John was persecuted for his faith. Their time of suffering for following Jesus was coming, just not yet. And so as Jesus is having this conversation with James and John, and it's almost like they're talking past each other because James and John completely misunderstand what is about to happen to Jesus. The other 10 disciples overhear this conversation, and they are not happy. I mean, you can almost imagine the other 10 disciples hearing James and John asking for these positions of prominence to sit to the right and the left of Jesus, and they're furious. Like, James and John, who do you think you are? Like, who gives you the right to ask to sit at Jesus' right and left? Is it because you think you're wealthier than the rest of us? We know from the beginning of Mark's gospel that James and John, their father Zebedee, was a little more better off than some others. He actually could hire men to help him. So maybe James and John were a little more wealthier than some of the other disciples. Or maybe they thought they had this special place of honor because they were part of Jesus' inner circle of disciples. So we know that Jesus had 12 disciples that he hung out with and spent a lot of time with. But then he had, of those 12, there were 3 that he spent even more time with, even more one-on-one intentional time with. And those 3 were James, John, and Peter. And so maybe they thought because they were part of Jesus' inner circle that gave them some sort of right or special privilege to be in these special positions of power, to be at Jesus' right and left in the kingdom. So we're not really sure what was going through the other disciples' minds, but they're not happy about this conversation. And Jesus' heart must be breaking because he can see this disunity among his disciples, that he's worked so hard to create this band of love among them, but now they're just arguing over who's the greatest. And so Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them." Jesus says, you know what it's like in your culture. You know what it's like to live in this Roman society where the Romans rule over you, and they exploit their power and position and status and wealth over you, and they can extract any service they want from you. They can make you pay as many taxes as they want. They can make you do anything they want you to do because they have the power and they lord that control over you. This is what it's like in your culture, and that's the picture of what greatness looks like. That being great is having the power to rule over others. But Jesus says to them, this is what it's like. This is the picture of greatness in your culture. But Jesus says, not so with you. Not so with you. This is the picture of greatness in your culture, to rule over and extract service from other people. But not so with you. There's a different picture for those of you who follow me. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be the slave of all. That true greatness is not about extracting service from others. That true service is about being willing to serve and be the servant of everyone. That this is what true greatness looks like in following Jesus. It's not about trying to compete over having those positions of prominence and power to sit at Jesus' right or left. Instead, true service looks like being willing to give your life away for others. And so here we find in Jesus' words that service, not making it in America, not having the power of the Roman Empire, but service is the secret to true greatness. But we might think, well, why is this? Why is service the secret to true greatness? Well, not only does Jesus say this and told us these words here in Mark 10, but Jesus lived his whole life. His whole life was characterized by this secret of service being the foundation to true greatness. In fact, Jesus goes on to say, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. That's why I came, was to be a servant of all, was to give my life away so that you all could experience abundant life. If anyone could have come with such power and prominence, it was Jesus, right? Jesus, the very Son of God, could have came and extracted incredible amounts of service out of people and could have lived the best worldly life possible with all his power and wealth and could have gotten the best that the world could offer. But that's not what Jesus chose to do. Instead, Jesus lived a life of service. In fact, from his birth until his death, Jesus lived as a servant. I mean, think about it. He was born in a barn and placed in a manger that was largely unnoticed except for a band of a couple smelly shepherds. Then he lived 2 years as a refugee in Egypt as King Herod was trying to kill him. And then he moved back to his hometown and lived as a carpenter's son and was relatively unknown until about age 30. And then he started traveling around, telling people about God, his Father, and about the kingdom of God. And as he traveled around, it was like Jesus was almost homeless, people thought, because he had no place to lay his head. And he kept hanging out with people on the margins of society and serving different people, that he would serve lepers and hang out with prostitutes and tax collectors, that he served children, that he even knelt to wash the dirt off of his disciples' feet. That Jesus lived this life of service. And for us who follow Jesus, we have to be willing to also live a life of service. Because Jesus, the greatest person who ever lived, not only said that service is the secret to greatness, but embodied it from his birth to his death and resurrection. That for us, service is the secret to true greatness. That is what we were created for. I had a professor in seminary who came into class one day and took out a cloth napkin, kind of like this. And he was picturing when we go to fancy restaurants that you might see cloth napkins there. And sometimes we'll take out the cloth napkin and you tuck it in your shirt and you say, that's kind of the universal sign that you're ready to eat, right? So bring on the food, bring on the service. And if I have enough money, I can buy the best food and service that money can buy. And you can just keep bringing it at me. Serve me. Bring me the best that money can buy. And you can apply this to more than just food, right? Bring me the best cars or house or experience or luxury. Bring me the best that money can buy. That if I have enough money, I can extract almost any service that I want to be pleased. That it's all about me. Serve me, me, me. The professor went on for several minutes talking about this attitude that many of us have of being wanted to be served. But he told us that for those of us who follow Jesus, we have to be willing to change the position of our napkin. That for those of us who follow Jesus, position is not about me and serving me, but it's how can I serve you? How can I help you? That service is the secret to true greatness. That only in giving our lives away, it's how we can reflect God's love to the world. It's part of what we were created for. In fact, that's one of the reasons I think that serving others sometimes makes us feel good, because I think that's what we were created for. That we weren't designed for life to be all about us and for people to serve us, but that we were designed to live our life in service to God and one another. This is what we were made for. So if we were made for a life of service, what can that actually look like in our everyday lives? In his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren offers 5 characteristics of real servants that I call the 5 R's of service that I want to share briefly with you this morning as ways that we can live as real servants in our lives this week. The first is that real servants realign their calendar and their budgets. What I mean by this is that real servants realize that everything they have, the time, the money, the resources, everything they have is a gift from God. That they don't own their time and their money. In fact, that they are stewards of it. That they use what's been given to them by God to serve God and others. And so they don't cling so tightly to it, but they create space and margin in their time and their budget so that they can be available to serve others. That real servants don't get to choose when they serve. That real servants don't just serve when it's convenient to them. Real servants don't get to choose how much it's going to cost them or how much time it's going to take. But real servants are available to serve as different needs arise. That they don't sit down and plan out every single moment and every single penny of their lives. Instead, they make themselves open and available to God's work in their lives. Instead of thinking like, okay, so today I'm going to get up and I'm going to eat breakfast at this time, I'm going to work out this time, I'm going to work from this time to this time, I'm going to have dinner with this person, I'm going to watch this TV show, read that. Instead of scheduling our whole lives out and largely benefit for ourselves, real servants will reorient their lives to create space and margin to be available to serve others as needs arise. Real servants reorient and realign their calendar and their budget. Real servants, as they realign their calendar and their budgets, are then freed up to recognize the needs that are around them. That they can recognize both big and small needs that face them every day. I think it's easier for us often to recognize big needs, right? Like all of us right now could probably see there's a huge need in the Carolinas right now to help with relief. Like all of us can recognize that need, and that's a huge need. And if you get a chance to help with that, by all means, I would encourage you to do that. But sometimes we get so caught up in these big needs of wanting to do great things for God that we miss the little needs in our lives every single day. That we miss that some of us just need to sit with our kid or our grandkid as they do their homework. Or maybe our spouse just needs us to iron their shirt before they go to work so that they have a better day. Or maybe our grandparents just need us to give them a call on the phone so that they know somebody's thinking about them and cares about them and loves them. That there are little and big needs around us every single day, and real servants recognize those needs. Real servants don't just recognize the needs, but they're resourceful and they meet the needs that they see around them. They recognize that the gifts and the resources that they have, and they use what they have at their fingertips to help meet those needs. They don't wait for the perfect time and circumstance to serve, but they take steps with what they have right now to meet those needs. Instead of saying, oh, someday I'll serve. Maybe one of these days I'll live a life of service. Maybe when I'm retired, or maybe when the kids are out of the house. They don't make excuses. Instead, they begin to serve right where they're at today and begin to meet those needs around them. Real servants are also reliable. If they say they're going to serve, they follow through on that commitment. They don't procrastinate, but they do what needs to be done in the moment. In fact, real servants don't retire, but they keep serving for as long as they live, living their whole life in service to God and others. And finally, real servants are reserved. And what I mean by this is that real servants are humble. Sometimes we have this weird idea of what humility looks like, I think, in our culture. Sometimes we think that being humble means that we just put ourselves down and talk terribly about ourselves. But real humility, I don't think, is talking less about ourselves and putting ourselves down. I think real humility has a different definition. That real humility is not just thinking less about ourselves, but real humility is thinking about ourselves less. Let me say that again. Real humility is not thinking less of yourself and putting yourself down. Real humility is thinking about yourself less. Real humility means thinking about the needs of others before you think about yourself. Putting the interest of others ahead of yourself. Reorienting and shifting the priorities of your life to be willing to serve others. To do even small things for others. To not seek the limelight, but to be willing to do even small, menial tasks that people may never even know that you did. I mean, we look at the life of Jesus, and Jesus would do these small, simple tasks that maybe some would say, oh, Jesus, that's beneath you. You don't need to worry about that. But no task was beneath Jesus, and no task is beneath us. That Jesus was willing to cook breakfast for his disciples, was willing to serve lepers, was willing to hang out with children, was willing to wash his disciples' feet. And we too have to be willing to do even the most simple task out of a true spirit of humility. Friends, the good news this morning is that this picture is not what true greatness is all about. That's good news for me and good news hopefully for some of you, because for some of us, we're never going to make it on this picture of greatness. The good news is that Jesus says the secret of true greatness is service. That all of us can be servants. All of us can take those 5 R's of service and apply them to our lives, to be available to serve, to recognize the needs, and to meet needs around us in big and small tasks every single day. Jesus has told us the secret to true greatness. That is not about extracting service from others and lording power over others. It's not about making it in America. But for those of us who follow Jesus, we have to be willing to be a servant of all. And that is how we can be truly